as soon as you're living abroad, you carry this otherness with you. Hello! I am here to share about my French background. My background with the French language, with France, living there. Sarah plus la France. Like, I'm here to talk about it because I am going to be doing a lot of videos about France on this channel, and I thought it'd be only right to share why I love this country so much, but also give some insight into my journey into loving it so much. Like, you know, from a young age, how I became interested in it, and then the steps that I took to eventually go and live there, and the steps I'm taking now to live there full-time again. So I have a few different eras of footage, some from a few weeks ago, some from today, but I will be sharing that background, and then also some commonly asked questions about living in France and what it's like to be a foreigner there and that kind of thing. So stick around. I hope you enjoy this video, and I don't know what I'm doing right now. I started learning French when I was 6. I went to the library and I picked out a cassette tape set that was an introduction to learning French, and I started to teach myself French phrases by putting cassettes in my cassette player. When I got to middle school and high school, it was my chance to learn French for real, and so I just went ahead and learned French, went to college, and that's when I studied abroad and lived in France for the first time. Because it was this pursuit through so much of my life, it was a no-brainer that I would study abroad. And when it came to the end of my trip, I really felt like there was something more for me in France. There was this big part of me that felt like there was so much left for me there to do. Cut to graduating from college, I knew that that's where I had to go next. I had to go back, and the easiest way for me to do that at the time was to do a master's there. I went back to Paris. I lived in Paris for 2 years, and I did a master's degree in anthropology. Cut to completing my master's degree, I thought I wanted to do a PhD, and I was planning on doing that in the UK. So I came back to the United States. I picked up a job to save money to earn towards the PhD tuition costs, and then COVID hit, and I was stuck in the US for 3 years. I knew I wanted to get back to France, but I didn't know how. Like, I needed some rope to climb up, and I just wasn't coming up with anything. And so I told myself, take a trip. The borders have finally reopened. You've renewed your passport. Like, you have savings. Just go. Just travel. Go be in love with France again. Just go back and refine yourself. And so that's what this trip is. It's always with you. It's always something that you're carrying around. It's a part of your identity suddenly. When you're in your home country, your national background isn't something that you're thinking about because you're in the majority and you're with everyone else who has that same identity. As soon as you're living abroad, you carry this otherness with you. That's probably not the most specific answer to the question, but that is the first layer of being a foreigner. In France, as an American, I'm treated really well. Also as a white gal, white American, treated very well, perceived, like, visually perceived as being part of the majority. And then it's when I start talking that people notice I'm not from there. Even though my French is very strong, it's noticeable that it's not the local way of speaking, the local dialect. I've noticed that overall French people are super curious about background. When you're living in France, people will ask you, as a foreigner in France, people will ask you, where are you from? D'où venez-vous? Like, d'où viens-tu? Where are you from? Like, people want to know the answer. And I get kind of tired of answering it because I'm trying to go about my day and my routine and my life, and I'm having to stop like what feels like every few minutes and go, oui, je suis américaine, je viens de Virginie, na na na. What is it like living alone as a woman in Paris? It's super empowering. I feel like that's not the answer people are expecting to hear, but living in Paris was one of the most empowering life experiences I ever had. It's an extremely safe city. It's a very travelable city. Paris is not huge, mile-wise, kilometer-wise. It's not very big. I'll put up on the screen what it is because I don't remember. It's very, very small city center-wise, and of course there's Ile-de-France, which is géant, but within the city borders it's very, very manageable, and with all of the transport that you have, the tram, bikes, the RER, the métro, les bus, even just walking, you can get around the city, and it's very accessible and very independent way to live and affordable. For all of these reasons, Paris is this amazing city to be in as a woman. The way I feel when I'm in Paris is very protected, very taken care of. Things are very clear in public, you know, there's maps everywhere, there are all of these transports, public transportation, like I was just talking about, and so it's very easy to orient yourself, figure out where you're going, figure out how to get somewhere. And I think living in a city, that's just one of the biggest things to living in a city that you need is a way to get around that city. There's a lot of diversity in the different neighborhoods insofar as the characteristics, and you have kind of your choice of what type of energy and identity you're going for when you're living in the city, which parts you identify with best, just like any city. Paris is really great. It's really, really great as a solo female to live there, to travel there. It was funny because this summer when I was traveling around, I went to another region of France, and I very randomly, long story short, met up with these British people that were, for some reason, in this very remote part of France like I was. And I mentioned that I used to live in Paris, that I had been there a few weeks prior, and the reaction from the guy of the group was like, oh, Paris is such a dangerous city. It's so crime-ridden, the terrorists, like les banlieues. And I could not disagree with him more, and I realized after a point it was this waste of time to talk to him about it, but I was so surprised to hear this really, really wrong perception that Paris is like this dangerous city. What is it like being a student in France? I'm going to talk about graduate studies. I would say that's the most common route to take as a foreigner in France. You go abroad and you do your master's degree. You can do your undergraduate as well, but it's more common to be there for your graduate studies. I did my master's in Paris, so I can speak to Paris rather than to all of France or other cities, but there definitely are similarities, so I think it could be helpful either way. Being a student is very different in France than it is in America. One of the main things I'll comment on and I'll talk about is the campus experience and the student life, and being in this contained little universe that we have in America where it's very cocooning, it's very much its own inner world. When you're in Paris studying, for instance, or maybe in another big French city, that type of identity and culture isn't going to happen as much on the university campus. In the United States, I think that culture and that inner world can happen because you're living at a university on the campus in most cases, and so that type of world can form, whereas in Paris, you're in Paris, and that's the overall place that's encompassing you. When I was in Paris, I was studying at 2 different universities and also doing other classes and curriculums at other institutions and other places. And so I was part of a lot of different groups and communities. My biggest one was where I lived, and so this was the most similar to an American college experience that you can get in France. I was at something called Cité Université, and this is where there are housing and residences for students, and so that was my main community. That was my main group of people because I saw those people every day. I cooked with them every night. I lived a few doors down from them, and it was on its own proper little campus. You had all of the different, in Paris, you had all of the different international housing. You would have the American house where I lived, Japan, you know, Sweden, China, like all of the different houses, and that was where you slept, ate, did sport, you know, met up with people, had parties, had little exchanges, you know, all the things. So that was the most similar. But then you would step off of this little campus and you'd be in the rest of Paris and you'd be in the rest of France. In America, going from the college life where you're surrounded by all of your friends, and so much of campus world in America is like very walkable, and it's this little utopia really, and having to go from that to like adult life is a pretty jarring transition. And I think that's why culturally in the United States there's so much discussion about adulting and making that switch, because it is a hard switch. Like, you exit the student life and you're suddenly at the arrival gate for being an adult. In France, I really liked how there's already this cultural expectation that you're meeting certain societal standards and you're doing certain things as an independent as an independent adult, but you're still a student, so you get certain benefits and certain help from society while you complete your studies. I think for me that makes more sense. It's a better balance. You get to have this independence that the state supports you with. They help, you know, offset the cost of your housing. Education costs are tuition costs very, very low. You're given medical care. So it's like very doable, I think, to transition from student to adult in France, because you're already being supported into that transition. I've traveled to a lot of other cities in France, but there's always more to explore. The thing that's really funny that I find about Paris versus other parts of France is that it really can feel like this split between there's Paris et le reste, which is not true, but when you're in Paris, it's a place that is all-encompassing. Like, you're in this little world that is Paris, and everything makes sense in a Paris way. And you get outside and you kind of realize, like, oh, other places don't play by these rules, have the same perspectives. There's different ways of being in France. Like, what? And that's why it's so refreshing to get out of Paris. So how does Paris compare to other cities in France? I would say there's a huge diversity depending on where you are. Obviously, if you're in Bretagne, it's very, very, very different from if you're in Le Sud, like around Marseille. There's also, one of the biggest things is like the cultural movement, the immigration that's come into France has really defined the cities in different ways. And so Marseille has a huge influx of immigrants from other parts of the world that Bretagne just doesn't have, you know? And so it's pretty interesting because that will really change the flavor of a place. I think there is so much diversity in France, it can feel like there isn't, because there is the French identity overall. And when you travel to any French city, you will feel like you're in France because of the architecture. I mean, there's difference in architecture, but I guess I'm talking more about like in public, there are things that are very uniform no matter where you are in France, like street signs, like the way that the roads work. I don't know if I'm giving good examples, but visually there are things that are the same if you're in Bretagne or if you're in Marseille. There is this cultural understanding of what it means to be French, and when you walk out the door, no matter what city you're in, there are certain expectations of you as a person being there. But it also means that you can walk down to the local boulangerie in Paris, in Marseille, in Dijon, and you'll know what to find. So do some exploration. Do figure out what you're looking for, you know? Is it something that's tied into culture, into, you know, societal diversity? Is it something about the place itself, like it's, you know, in the Alps and you can have that experience? Like, what is it that you're seeking out? For me, when I went to Paris, it was to really be at what I wanted to be the center of things, and Paris definitely thinks that it's the center of things, so it worked out. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about France, about Paris, about la vie française, la vie en rose. Thanks for watching. Bye, au revoir, ciao, bisous. Oh, and also, if you have any questions, burning questions about Paris, about the French language, France, Europe, anything that you think I could answer, put them in the comments below and I'll either reach out and respond or use those in a future video. So please reach out, let me know what questions you have, what makes you curious, and I'll answer them. Au revoir, bye!